They laughed when he helped her walk home. By sunrise, those same men wouldn't dare speak above a whisper. The dust that afternoon clung to everything, settling into the cracks of Dry Creek like it had nowhere else left to go. The kind of heat that pressed down on a man's shoulders and made even breathing feel like work. And inside the saloon, the air hung thick with the smell of stale whiskey, leather, and long days that never seemed to end, where voices carried easy but kindness didn't. Not here, not anymore. She stood just inside the doorway, the Apache girl, maybe 19, maybe younger. It was hard to tell under the dirt and the quiet in her eyes. One hand braced against the frame, the other holding the edge of her dress where it had torn near the ankle, her steps uneven, careful, like every inch forward had to be negotiated with pain, and no one moved. Not a chair scraping, not a glass setting down softer than usual. Just a few glances, quick and dismissive, the kind men give when they've already decided someone doesn't belong. No service, the bartender muttered without looking up, wiping the same spot on the counter like it mattered more than the person standing there. And she didn't argue, didn't plead, just nodded once like she expected it, like she'd been here before in 100 different places with the same result, turning slowly, favoring her left leg. And that's when the room found its humor, low chuckles at first, then louder. Someone in the corner saying something under his breath that earned a few nods. And a sharper laugh, the kind that sticks in the air longer than it should. In the far corner, half in shadow, sat Ethan Cole, hat low, hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold an hour ago. A man most folks forgot was even there until he moved, which wasn't often. His coat worn thin at the elbows, boots dusted white from roads that didn't lead anywhere worth staying. The kind of man a town lets exist as long as he stays quiet and keeps to the edges, and he had been doing just that, watching without watching, the way you learn to do when you've spent too long being looked through instead of at. The girl took another step and stumbled just enough to catch herself on the wall, not falling, not asking for help, just correcting and continuing like it was something she'd practiced, and something in that small movement cut through the noise in a way the laughter didn't. Something steady, something stubborn, something that didn't match the way the room had already decided her story should go, and Ethan felt it before he thought it. The shift, subtle as wind changing direction out on the plains. A chair scraped. Not loud, just enough. Heads turned. He stood. No speech, no anger, just motion, slow and certain, crossing the room with the kind of quiet that makes people notice more than shouting ever could. And when he reached the counter, he set down a couple of coins, not looking at the bartender, not asking for permission, just leaving them there like a statement no one needed explained. Then he turned to her, stopping a few feet away, leaving space, enough for her to choose, because out here, choice was the only thing that still meant something. You heading north? He asked, voice low, steady, not soft but not hard either, just honest in a way that didn't try to prove anything. And she looked at him then, really looked, eyes dark and searching like she was measuring more than the question, more than the man, like she was deciding if the ground beneath her feet had shifted or if it was just another trick of the light. And after a moment, she nodded once, a small movement, but certain. Ethan tipped his head toward the door. I'll walk. That was it. No grand gesture. No promise. Just a direction. Outside. The sun hit like a wall, the dust lifting under their steps as they moved past the hitching posts and the eyes that followed them out. The laughter quieter now, uncertain, like it had lost its footing somewhere between the doorway and the road, and Ethan didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the stares or the silence settling behind them, just matched his pace to hers, slow, measured, letting the town fall away one step at a time. The sound of boots on dry earth replacing the noise of men who had nothing better to do than watch. And out there, beyond the last fence line, where the land opened up and the wind carried different stories, the space between them stayed deliberate, respectful, two strangers moving in the same direction, not touching, not rushing, just walking, because sometimes that's all a man can offer, and sometimes it's everything. The road stretched out ahead in a long, pale ribbon, cutting through land that did not belong to fences or men who built towns, and the further they walked, the quieter it became, the kind of quiet that was not empty but watchful, where every sound carried meaning if you knew how to listen, the creak of leather, the shift of gravel under boots, the distant call of something unseen beyond the low hills, and Ethan kept his pace steady, just behind her, never closing the distance unless she slowed, never letting it grow so wide that she would feel alone, a balance learned without being taught. After a mile, maybe two, he noticed the way her steps shortened, not from hesitation but from the effort it took to keep moving, the slight hitch in her breath she tried to hide, the way her hand tightened around the fabric at her side. And he glanced ahead at the rise in the land where the road bent toward a stand of juniper trees, shade thin but real, a place to stop without making it feel like stopping. "We can rest there," he said, not a question, just an offering. And she looked at the trees, then back at the ground, weighing something he could not see, before giving a small nod, the kind that said yes without wanting to admit the need behind it. They reached the shade and she lowered herself onto a flat rock with care, not wincing, not showing it, but the tension in her shoulders told the truth well enough, and Ethan moved a few steps away, giving her space again, pulling the canteen from his saddle, the water inside warm from the sun, but still water, still something, and he set it on the rock between them instead of handing it to her, letting her decide, always letting her decide. And after a moment, she picked it up, took a slow drink, then another, not greedy, not desperate, just measured, like everything else about her. "You walk far?" he asked after a while, eyes on the horizon instead of her, watching the heat shimmer rise off the earth in soft waves. And her voice came quiet but clear. "Far enough," she said, and that was all, no story, no explanation, just a line drawn where questions would not cross. And Ethan accepted it the same way he had accepted everything else, without pushing, because out here, a man learned that answers given freely were worth more than those pulled out of someone who did not want to speak. The wind shifted then, carrying something faint with it, not a sound exactly, more like a presence, the way the air changes when you are no longer alone, and Ethan felt it before he understood it, his hand resting lightly on the saddle horn, not reaching for anything, just grounding himself in the moment. And he turned his head slightly, scanning the ridgeline without making it obvious, seeing nothing at first, just rock and brush and sky. But the feeling stayed, steady and certain, like eyes that did not blink. She noticed it too. He could tell by the way her posture changed, not fear, not alarm, just awareness sharpening, her gaze lifting briefly toward the same ridge before dropping again. And for the first time since they left town, there was something like tension between them, not directed at each other, but shared, understood without words. "Your people are close," Ethan said, keeping his voice even, and she did not answer right away, just capped the canteen and set it back on the rock, her fingers brushing the worn leather as if memorizing it. Then she stood, slower this time, and faced the direction of the trees beyond the ridge, the place where the land dipped out of sight. "Close enough," she said, and there was something different in her tone now, something steadier, something that did not belong to the girl who had stood in that doorway an hour ago, and Ethan caught it, not questioning it, just noting it the way a man notes the weather turning before a storm that may or may not come. They started walking again, the distance between them unchanged, the silence deeper now, but not uncomfortable, more like something settling into place. And as they neared the edge where the land dropped into a narrow valley, Ethan saw it, just for a second, a flicker of movement along the ridge to their right, gone as quickly as it appeared, but enough to confirm what the air had already told him. And he did not react, did not slow, did not turn his head again, because whatever was watching was not for him to challenge or to greet. It was simply there, part of the land the same way the wind and the dust were part of it, and beside him. She kept walking, step by careful step, until the path ahead began to change, less worn, less claimed, leading into a place where a man like Ethan Cole knew better than to follow any further unless he was asked. The path ended where the land stopped pretending to belong to anyone, a narrow line fading into scattered stone and low brush, the kind of place where tracks did not last long and intentions mattered more than directions. And Ethan slowed without thinking, his boots settling into the dust, as if the ground itself had asked him to, the air cooler here by a few degrees, shaded by the rise of the valley walls, and the silence heavier, not empty, but filled with something that held its breath. She took 2 more steps ahead of him before stopping, not turning right away, just standing there with her back to him, the wind catching a loose strand of her dark hair, and pulling it across her face. And for a moment, neither of them moved. The distance between them no longer just space, but a line that meant something now, a boundary drawn without words. "You stop here," she said finally, her voice steady, not unkind, just certain, and Ethan nodded once, because he already knew, had known since the ridge, maybe even before that, when the air first changed and the land started watching them back. He shifted the reins on his horse, letting the animal settle beside him, ears flicking toward the valley as if it could hear what he could only feel, and he kept his eyes on the ground a few feet ahead, not out of fear, but out of respect for a place that was not his to claim with a stare. She turned then, slowly, facing him fully for the first time since they left the town behind, and up close, without the dust of the road or the shadow of a doorway. There was something different in her expression, something composed, something that belonged to more than just a traveler trying to make it home, and Ethan saw it, recognized it without needing a name. "You walked far," she said, echoing his own words from earlier, and there was a faint shift in her tone, not quite a question, not quite a statement, more like an acknowledgement placed carefully between them, and he gave a small shrug, the motion easy, unforced. "Far enough," he answered, and for the first time, the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to count as something shared. The wind moved again, stronger now, brushing through the valley and carrying with it that same quiet presence, only closer, clearer, and Ethan felt it settle around them, not closing in, not threatening, just there, like a circle drawn without being seen, and he knew they were no longer alone in any way that mattered. She reached to her neck then, fingers slipping beneath the edge of her collar, and drew out something small, something that caught the light just enough to stand out against the muted tones of the land, a thin strip of leather with a stone tied at its center, smooth and worn, the color of deep water where the sun does not reach, and she held it in her palm for a second, looking at it, as if weighing more than its size suggested, before stepping forward and extending it toward him. Ethan did not take it right away, his eyes moving from the object to her face and back again, measuring the moment, because out here, things given without explanation carried weight that could not be returned once accepted, and she met his gaze without hesitation, the steadiness in her eyes leaving no room for doubt. "For the road," she said, and that was all, no story, no condition, just the offering itself, simple and complete. He reached out then, slow, deliberate, taking the leather cord between his fingers, feeling the warmth of it, the slight roughness where it had been handled over time, and he nodded once, not in thanks exactly, but in recognition of what had passed between them, something that did not need to be named to be understood. She stepped back after that, the distance returning but not the same as before, lighter somehow, like it no longer needed to be protected, and she turned toward the valley, toward the place where the land dipped and disappeared, pausing only once. More as if to mark the moment in a way words could not. Then she walked on, her steps steadier now, more certain, the unevenness still there, but no longer defining her pace. Ethan stayed where he was, watching only until she reached the first line of shadow at the valley floor, and then he looked away, giving her the rest of the journey without witness, because some paths were meant to be finished alone, and behind him, the wind shifted once more, carrying a sound so faint it might have been imagined, the softest movement of many feet against stone, not approaching, not retreating, just present, like the land itself had taken notice and decided to remember. The valley swallowed her in silence, and when she was gone, it was as if the land closed gently behind her, leaving no trace but the memory of where she had been, and Ethan stood there a moment longer than he needed to, the leather cord still resting in his hand, the small stone catching the last edge of afternoon light before he slipped it into his pocket without ceremony, not hiding it, not displaying it, just carrying it the way a man carries something he does not yet understand. The wind eased, the presence along the ridge thinning like a shadow at dusk, and whatever had been watching seemed to withdraw without sound, not retreating, not chasing, simply deciding the moment had passed, and Ethan let out a breath he had not noticed he was holding, turning back toward the open road, toward the place where his world resumed its narrow shape of fences, dust, and men who measured things in simple terms. The walk back felt longer, though the distance had not changed, each step carrying a weight that did not come from the ground beneath him, but from something quieter, something that settled into a man after he crossed a line he could not see until he had already stepped over it. And he did not rush, did not look back, just followed the same path in reverse, the juniper trees, the rise, the pale ribbon of road stretching out ahead like it had been waiting for him to return alone. By the time the town came into view, the sun had lowered enough to cast long shadows across the buildings, the kind that made everything look older, more tired, and the first thing he noticed was not the usual noise of evening, but the way it had softened, conversations quieter, movements slower, as if something had reached them before he had, something carried on the same wind that had brushed the valley. He led his horse past the hitching post and stepped onto the boardwalk, boots thudding lightly against the wood, and heads turned, not all at once, not in any obvious way, but enough to feel, the glances longer than before, the expressions harder to read, and no one laughed this time. No low remarks, no easy dismissal, just a space opening around him that had not been there earlier. The bartender paused mid-motion as Ethan stepped inside, cloth in hand, eyes lifting just long enough to register him before dropping again, and for a moment, it seemed like everything might return to the way it had been, the same patterns, the same indifference, but something held, something unspoken that kept the room from settling back into its old shape. "You went north," a man near the window said, not accusing, not friendly, just stating what everyone had already guessed, and Ethan shrugged out of his coat, hanging it on the same peg he always used, the motion familiar, grounding. "Walked a ways," he replied, voice even, giving nothing more than the truth required, and the man nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed more than the words themselves. Outside, a horse shifted, then another, the faint sound of hooves against packed dirt carrying through the open doorway, and Ethan felt it again, that subtle change in the air, not as strong as before, but present, like an echo that refused to fade completely, and a few men near the door glanced out without meaning to, their bodies reacting before their thoughts caught up. The sheriff stood near the far wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Ethan in a way that was not quite suspicion and not quite understanding, something in between, something unsettled, and when their gazes met, there was a pause, brief but real, before the sheriff looked away first, shifting his stance like a man who had just realized he did not have the full picture anymore. Ethan took a seat at the bar, resting his hands on the worn wood, feeling the grooves carved by years of use, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it had before, the same smells, the same light filtering through the dusty windows, but underneath it, something had changed, something quiet and irreversible, like the town itself had taken a breath and was still deciding what to do with it. He reached into his pocket then, fingers brushing the leather cord, the small stone cool now against his skin, and he left it there, not taking it out, not showing it to anyone, because whatever it meant was not meant for this room. Not yet, and outside, the last light of day stretched thin across the horizon, fading slowly, like a promise that had not been spoken out loud but had been heard all the same. Night settled over Dry Creek without asking permission, the kind of slow descent where shadows stretched first, then deepened, then took hold of everything that daylight had tried to define, and the town moved into its usual rhythm, lanterns lit one by one, voices lowering, doors creaking shut against a darkness that felt thicker than usual, heavier, like it carried something unseen just beyond the edge of sight. And Ethan stepped out of the saloon with that same quiet he always wore, hat pulled low, coat resting easy on his shoulders, but the air outside met him differently now, cooler, sharper, like it had been waiting. His horse stood where he left it, steady, but the animal's ears flicked more than usual, turning toward the open land beyond the last building, then back again, as if it could not decide where to listen, and Ethan noticed it, resting a hand along the animal's neck, feeling the tension beneath the hide, not fear, not exactly, just awareness, the kind that comes when something larger than a single man's understanding moves through the world without making a sound. "Easy," he murmured, more out of habit than need, and the horse settled a fraction, enough to show it trusted him even if it did not understand what was changing. The street lay mostly empty now, a few figures crossing from one doorway to another, boots scuffing against dirt, Voices kept low as if the night itself might be listening. And from the far end of town, where the road stretched back toward the valley, a faint line of dust hovered in the moonlight, not rising, not falling, just there, suspended like something. Caught between arrival and departure, and Ethan's eyes lingered on it longer than they should have, not because he could see anything clear, but because something in his chest told him it mattered. He turned away eventually, leading his horse toward the small stable behind his cabin, the boards creaking underfoot as he moved through familiar space that felt just slightly unfamiliar tonight, like a room rearranged while he was gone. And he worked by routine, loosening the saddle, brushing the dust from the animal's back, setting feed in the trough with measured movements that kept his hands busy while his mind stayed still, because out here, thinking too far ahead rarely did a man any good. Inside the cabin, the air held the faint scent of wood and old leather, the kind of place built for one and used that way long enough to forget it could hold more, and Ethan lit a single lamp, the flame steady, casting a warm circle that did not quite reach the corners, and he sat at the small table, resting his forearms against the worn surface, listening to the quiet settle around him. For a while, nothing happened, just the ticking of cooling wood, the soft shift of wind against the walls, the ordinary sounds that told a man the world was as it should be. But then, faint and distant, something else threaded through it, not loud enough to name, not close enough to fear, just a rhythm, slow, steady, like footsteps carried across miles of open land, and Ethan did not move, did not rise, did not reach for anything. He simply listened, the way he had learned to listen to storms. Before they broke, to cattle before they spooked, to silence before it changed. His hand drifted to his pocket without thinking, fingers brushing the leather cord, the small stone cool and solid, and he drew it out, holding it in the lamplight, turning it once between his thumb and forefinger, the surface smooth from years of touch, catching the glow in a way that made it seem deeper than it was, like it held something that did not belong to the light at all. And for a moment, he considered what it might mean, why it had been given, what it would ask of him in return, but the questions did not settle, they never did, so he let them pass, setting the cord on the table instead of putting it back, leaving it where he could see it without needing to understand it. Outside, the faint rhythm continued, not closer, not farther, just present, like the land itself was breathing in a way the town had forgotten how to hear, and Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes half on the stone, half on the door, not expecting anything, not preparing for anything, just waiting in that quiet space where a man learns that whatever comes next will come whether he names it or not. And beyond the thin walls of his cabin, the night held its shape, steady and patient, as if it knew something the town did not, and was in no hurry to explain it. The rhythm did not stop, not through the night, not through the hours when most men in Dry Creek turned in and let sleep take them away from whatever the world might be doing beyond their walls. It stayed there, steady and patient, like something that did not tire, and sometime before dawn, when the sky was still holding on to its last shade of black, Ethan opened his eyes without knowing exactly when he had fallen asleep. The lamp burned low, the flame thin and wavering, and the stone still rested on the table where he had left it, catching just enough light to stand out against the wood. He did not sit up right away, just lay there for a moment, listening, and the sound was clearer now, no longer something the mind could dismiss as wind or distance. It had shape, cadence, the kind that came from many moving together with purpose, not hurried, not scattered, but organized in a way that spoke of intention, and Ethan pushed himself up slowly, boots meeting the floor with a soft, familiar weight, his movements calm, unforced, because whatever was coming had already decided to arrive. Outside, the first hint of morning stretched across the horizon, a pale line of gray giving way to faint gold, and the town looked different in that light, quieter than usual, as if it had woken early without knowing why. Doors still closed, but not completely. Curtains shifted just enough for someone inside to watch without being seen, and Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cool air brushing against his face, carrying that same presence he had felt since the valley. Only now it filled the space entirely, leaving no room for doubt. At the far edge of town, where the road met the open land, the dust was no longer suspended. It moved, slow and deliberate, rising in a wide line that stretched farther than a single man could take in at once. And beneath it, shapes began to form, dark against the growing light. Not scattered figures, not travelers passing through, but a line, long and unbroken, moving forward with a quiet that held more weight than any noise ever could. Ethan rested one hand against the porch post, not gripping, just grounding himself in the moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon as the shapes grew clearer, resolving into riders, dozens at first, then more, then too many to count without losing track, their pace measured, their formation steady, and still, not a sound rose from them. No calls, no signals, just the soft, collective movement of many horses crossing the land as if they had done it 1,000 times before. Behind him, a door opened, then another, the town beginning to stir not with its usual rhythm, but with something sharper, more uncertain, boots stepping onto boardwalks, voices kept low but urgent, and the sheriff appeared at the edge of the street, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the same line Ethan had been watching, his posture rigid in a way that did not come from authority, but from the absence of it. "That is not a passing group," someone said from behind, the words barely above a whisper, and no one answered, because there was nothing to say that would make it smaller, nothing to reduce what was unfolding into something familiar. The light grew stronger, the sun pushing itself over the horizon, and with it, the riders came fully into view, not scattered, not chaotic, but arranged, hundreds of them, moving as one, their presence filling the space between sky and earth in a way that made the town feel smaller with every passing second. And still, they made no move toward aggression, no sign of urgency, just a steady approach that carried its own kind of certainty. Ethan did not step back, did not step forward. He simply stood where he was, the same man who had walked a quiet road the day before, watching. As the distance closed, as the line reached the edge of town and slowed, then stopped, the horses settling into stillness as if they had arrived exactly where they intended to be, and for a long moment, nothing happened, no one spoke, no one moved, just two worlds facing each other in the first light of morning, waiting for something that had not yet been said to finally find its voice. No one gave the order to move, but the town shifted anyway, small steps backward, hands hovering near belts, eyes fixed forward like men trying to measure something too large to understand, and the silence stretched, not empty but full, pressing against every doorway and window until even the wind seemed to hold still, and out there, the riders remained as they were, unmoving, their line unbroken, their presence steady in a way that did not threaten but did not yield either. The sheriff took a step forward into the street, then stopped, as if the ground itself had reminded him that this was not his kind of moment, his badge catching the early light but offering no authority here, and he cleared his throat, the sound thin against the weight of what stood before them. "State your business," he called out, trying to give his voice shape, something firm, something that belonged to him, but it carried only a short distance before fading into the open air, and no one on the other side answered, not a shift, not a gesture, just the same quiet, deliberate stillness that had brought them here. Ethan remained on the porch, one hand resting against the post, the other hanging loose at his side, his gaze steady, not searching for danger, not counting numbers, just taking in what was already clear, that whatever this was, it had not come for noise or display, it had come for something else, something that did not need to announce itself to be understood. A rider near the center of the line moved then, not forward in a rush, not breaking formation, just guiding his horse a few steps ahead, enough to stand apart without separating from the whole, and even that small motion drew every eye in town, the focus tightening, breaths held without anyone saying so, and the man sat tall in the saddle, older, his presence marked not by force but by the way the others did not need to look at him to know where he was. He did not speak right away, just let the moment settle, let the town feel the distance between what they knew and what stood before them, and when he finally raised a hand, it was slow, measured, a signal that did not command but invited attention, and the line behind him remained perfectly still, as if the gesture had passed through them without a ripple. Ethan felt the leather cord in his pocket, the weight of it small but certain, and something in him shifted, not fear, not anticipation, just recognition, like a piece of a puzzle falling into place without needing to see the full picture. and he stepped down from the porch, boots meeting the dirt with a soft, deliberate sound that carried farther than it should have in the quiet. A few heads turned toward him, quick, uncertain, as if they had forgotten he was there, or had not yet decided what he was in all of this. But Ethan did not look at them, did not acknowledge the glances or the tension building behind him. He simply walked forward, slow and even, stopping a few yards into the street, enough to stand between the town and the riders without placing himself above or below either side. The older man's eyes found him immediately, not searching, not questioning, just settling, as if he had been expected, and for a moment, nothing passed between them but that look, steady, quiet, carrying more weight than words ever could, and the rest of the riders remained as they were, not watching the town, not scanning the buildings. Their attention fixed on this single point where two paths had crossed the day before and now met again under a different light. Behind Ethan, the town held its breath, waiting for something sharp, something loud, something they understood, but it did not come, and in that absence, the tension shifted, not breaking, not easing, just changing shape into something unfamiliar, something that did not fit the stories they told themselves about how these moments were supposed to go. And out in the open, under a sky that had fully given itself to morning, the stillness deepened, as if the land itself was listening, waiting for the one thing that would make sense of everything that had led to this point. The older man studied Ethan for a long moment, not measuring him the way men in town did, not weighing clothes or posture or the dust on his boots, but something quieter, something that seemed to look past what was visible and settle on what remained when all the noise fell away. And when he finally spoke, his voice did not carry like a command. It moved low and steady, meant for one man, and yet heard by all. "You walked with her," he said, and it was not a question, not even an accusation, just a statement placed carefully into the space between them, and Ethan did not hesitate, did not shift his stance or glance back at the town behind him. He simply nodded once. "I did." The words were plain, unguarded, offered without defense. And for a heartbeat, nothing followed. The kind of pause that stretches just long enough for men to expect something else, something sharper, something that would fit the stories they had told themselves all their lives. But again, it did not come. The older man inclined his head slightly, a gesture so small it might have been missed if not for the way the riders behind him seemed to recognize it. Not moving, not reacting, just holding their place with the same quiet discipline that had carried them across miles of open land. "She reached home," he continued, his eyes never leaving Ethan, and there was something in his tone now, something that carried weight without force, and Ethan answered the same way he had answered everything else, without adding to it, without trying to shape it into something more than it was. That was the idea. A faint shift passed through the line of riders then, not movement, not unrest, just a subtle change, like wind passing through tall grass that never bends enough to break its shape. And from somewhere within that line, another figure stepped forward, lighter, smaller, moving with a familiarity that made the distance between past and present collapse into something immediate. And when she came into the open, the morning light caught her fully, clear and steady, no dust, no shadow, and the town saw her not as she had been, but as she was, composed, certain, standing with a presence that did not ask for recognition and yet held it all the same. Ayanna stopped beside the older man, her gaze moving briefly across the town, not lingering, not judging, just taking in what was there before settling on Ethan, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them different now, no longer uncertain, no longer carrying the weight of strangers, but something quieter, something complete. She reached to her neck, fingers brushing the place where the cord had been, then lowered her hand, the absence itself speaking clearly enough, and the older man followed her gesture, his attention returning to Ethan with a steadiness that left no room for misunderstanding. "You did not ask her name," he said, and again, it was not a question, and Ethan shook his head once. Did not seem needed. Another pause, shorter this time, sharper in its clarity, and the older man's gaze shifted slightly, not away, but outward, toward the town that stood behind Ethan, watching, waiting, trying to read what they did not understand, and when he spoke again, his voice carried just enough to reach them, not raised, not forced, but clear. "Many saw her," he said, few walked. The words settled into the air, simple, undeniable, and no one answered, not because they could not, but because there was nothing to add that would not lessen what had already been said, and the silence that followed was not the same as before. It did not press or threaten. It revealed, laying bare the difference between what had been done and what had not. The older man looked back to Ethan then, and something shifted in his expression, not approval, not gratitude in any form the town would recognize, but acknowledgement, quiet and complete, the kind that did not need to be repeated to hold its meaning. He lifted his hand once more, a small motion, and this time, the response came, not loud, not sudden, but unified, the riders adjusting their posture, reins held steady, their presence tightening into something deliberate, something that marked a moment rather than a movement, and Ethan stood where he was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, the same man he had been the day before, and yet not quite the same in the way the world now chose to see him, and in the growing light of morning, under a sky that had fully awakened, the distance between one quiet act and what followed it closed completely, leaving only the truth of it standing in the open, clear for anyone willing to look. For a long moment after the words settled, nothing changed, not in the way the town expected, no sudden movement, no raised voices, just the quiet weight of truth resting where everyone could see it. And then, without signal or sound, it began, not from the front, not from the center, but from the edges of the line, one rider at a time shifting, not forward, not outward, but down, slow and deliberate, until a single knee met the earth, and then another, and another, the motion passing through the line like a current too steady to break, until what had been a wall of riders became something else entirely, something lower, something offered, and the stillness that followed carried more meaning than anything spoken before it. The town did not understand it, not fully, but they felt it, the way the air changed when something rare happened, something that did not belong to their rules or their expectations, and a few men lowered their hands from where they had hovered uncertainly, the tension in their shoulders easing not because they chose to, but because there was nothing left to hold against. Ethan did not move at first, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged, as if he had not yet decided what this moment required of him. And maybe he had not, because out here, respect was not something a man demanded or even accepted lightly. It was something he stood inside of, something that passed through him whether he reached for it or not. Ayanna watched him, her expression calm, not waiting, not urging, just present, and the older man remained as he was, upright in the saddle, his eyes on Ethan with that same quiet recognition, as if this was not a reward, not a ceremony, but a simple acknowledgement of something already completed. The sun climbed a little higher, the light strengthening across the land, touching the roofs of the town, the worn boards of the porches, the faces of men who had spent their lives believing they understood how the world worked, and in that light, the difference became clear, not in grand gestures, but in small things, in who had acted when no one was watching, and who had not. Ethan took a step forward. Then, not toward the riders, not toward the town, just forward, into the space that had opened around him, and he reached into his pocket, drawing out the leather cord, the stone catching the morning light in a way that made it seem deeper, older, and he held it for a moment, turning it once between his fingers, before letting it fall back against his palm, not raising it, not displaying it, just acknowledging it in the same quiet way it had been given. "You do not owe me," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the front of the line, and the words were simple, honest, without weight beyond what they were, and for a second, it seemed like that might be the end of it, the moment closing as quietly as it had opened, but the older man shook his head once, slow, certain. "It is not a debt," he replied, and there was something final in that, something that settled the matter without argument, and Ethan understood, not in words, but in the way a man understands the land after walking it long enough, that this was not about balance or exchange, it was about recognition, about something seen and answered in kind. Ayanna stepped back then, returning to her place beside the older man, her gaze lingering on Ethan for a brief moment, not as a farewell, not as a promise, just as a mark of what had passed between them, and then she turned her attention forward, and the older man lifted his hand once more, a small motion, and the line responded again, rising as one, smooth and quiet, the horses shifting beneath them, ready without being urged. They did not linger after that, did not wait for reaction or approval. They simply turned, the line folding back into itself with the same order it had arrived in, and began to move, not hurried, not slow, just steady, carrying themselves away from the town and back toward the open land, leaving behind no mark but the memory of what had happened in the space between sunrise and understanding. The dust settled gradually after they passed, the air returning to its usual stillness, but the town did not return with it, not right away, because something had shifted in a way that could not be undone, something quiet and lasting, and Ethan stood there a moment longer, the leather cord resting in his hand, the weight of it unchanged, and then he slipped it back into his pocket, turning without ceremony, without looking to see who watched or what they thought, and walked back toward his cabin, the same measured pace he had always carried, because out here, a man did not need to speak to be known, and he did not need a crowd to prove what he already understood, that sometimes the loudest thing a man can do is simply walk beside someone, when no one else will, and let the rest speak for itself.